first guest this evening is John Bornschein, and John comes out of Colorado, and he is the executive director of the National Day of Prayer Task Force. He's an executive member of the National Prayer Committee and the executive producer of Drive Through History America. He's had... I just want you to hear this because he's really devoted his life to ministry. 17 years in the ministry as a missionary. He's been a youth pastor. He's worked with In Touch, Focus on the Family. He holds a Bachelor's of Theology, and he's pursuing a Master's of Divinity degree. And he's authored a book called Frontline on Prayer and Spiritual Warfare. Please welcome John Bornschein. Well, John, thanks so much for talking with us. We were just before we just came up here. You were talking a little bit about the way of the Master, and you had told me a cool little story about your brother, and I just wanted you to share that.
Well, it's an honor for me to be here to finally just to get to tell you to your face what a difference you've made personally in my life and in my family's life, because I have a brother who he's been in Hollywood for years, and he was sort of the mastermind behind some of these horror films. You know, he did a lot of makeup effects, and he was deeply entrenched in it. And he walked away from the Lord. He was the prodigal son we were praying for. And I mean, here he is in Hollywood producing some of these horrible films, and he watched your show, and you got a hold of him. God got a hold of him. And now he walked away from the film industry. He only takes projects that only glorify the Lord now.
And this was the way of the Master that he saw.
Yeah. And, you guys got a hold of Ray Comfort. Man,
now, I just find that so interesting. So he's not a Christian. He's not walking in the Lord. How did he see the way of the Master? Did he see it on a Christian television station?
I can only say by the power of prayer. Because somehow, some way, God got a hold of him. He was watching TV, flipped through it. You know,
channel surfing, he just saw something interesting.
TVN, he watches the program, and it took a little while. God was working with him, but they said, "Oh, you'll never work in this industry again." And now he's doing better than he ever did. He's making more money than he ever did. And he's doing things that glorify God. And it's just a blessing. I mean, he actually challenges me now. He's like, did you get out there? Did you go witness today? What are you doing? It's like, well, I'm doing this prayer thing and teaching people to pray. And he's like, you got to get out there and teach people about the Lord. Right. So he's on fire for it.
You just make sure he hits his knees before he gets out there and shares the gospel.
That's right. That's right. In tandem.
That's right. What's his name?
His name's Dave Salvadorine.
Dave. Oh, that's great. Well, I hope we get a chance to work together someday.
Yeah.
Well, John, tell me about the National Day of Prayer. Well, first of all, when is the National Day of Prayer? That is one day every year. Is it always on the same day?
It is. It's on the first Thursday of every May, and it's an incredible opportunity, really, for people to get out there very publicly and demonstrate in prayer that we're going back to our roots, that this is a nation founded on biblical principles, and we remember that. We return to God. Yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question. We're constantly hearing on the secular news that this was not a Christian nation. It wasn't built on biblical principles, that it was really a product of the Enlightenment and these minds who really were trying to separate church and state, and it's kind of turned into a separation of God and state.
Right.
And you're saying that National Day of Prayer has been here since the beginning.
Well, of the 50-plus writers of the Constitution, all but one of them were either teachers, they were pastors, they were leaders in the faith. They weren't trying to defaith America. They were just trying to protect our right to worship. And in fact, that's what we're doing today. We have this right. It's a God-given right. Americans, we have this privilege to be able to pray and pray regularly, and we're able to get out there in very public ways. This happened since 1775. The Second Continental Congress, they wrote over 66 calls to prayer in 8 years. 66 books of the Bible. It's pretty ironic, isn't it?
The Congress had called for days of prayer, is what you're saying. So this is coming right down from the government.
Well, you know what? I believe it's a balance between the civil authorities and the religious leaders. That God has given us an opportunity for both to come together and remember who provides the blessing to this land. Where does justice come from? Where does tranquility and welfare? This comes from God, and we do this on the National Day of Prayer. But it's not more than one day. It's every day.
Well, I've been on a learning journey recently with a documentary that I have been producing and learning about the men that you're talking about, the framers of the Constitution, the founders of our country, and our forefathers were men who were deeply religious, and they came here to establish a land where they could further the gospel of Christ to the ends of the earth. And they were willing to lay their face down in the mud and blow bubbles so that their children could step on their backs if they had to get the gospel to the ends of the world.
That's right.
And this concept of separation of church and state has been so twisted and turned upside down that people have the impression now that prayer is not legal or that it shouldn't be done in the public.
Well, and, you know, it's interesting if you think about from 1620 when the Mayflower Compact was written, what did they say? For the advancement of the Christian faith. Before they stepped off the boat, they were already dedicating it to God. I mean, these were people who were dying for their faith. And I tell you, it's not going to stop on my watch. You know, and that's what we're challenging everybody here today to say, we are carrying the torch. It's been handed to us for such a time as this, to be intentional about carrying on this legacy, a standing stone in our culture today.
That's awesome. We have a clip about the National Day of Prayer. Let's watch. Gotta love that.
Yeah, that doesn't get you fired up. I don't know what will, right?
That's awesome. So, tell me some things that has happened as a result of the day of prayer, or prayers that are all surrounding this whole event that you're putting together.
Well, we've seen prayer transforming communities. Some exciting things that have happened where mayors will gather together with police department and fire department and pastors, and they'll surround communities that are plagued with crime. Maybe there's high abortion rates, high divorce rates, and they're intentionally praying over those things, and we're seeing communities literally healing right before our eyes. We're watching 2 Chronicles 7:14 happen before our eyes, and so our website is filled with these stories that just keep coming out, and they don't make the headlines. But I assure you, and I try to give hope and encouragement to people, say we are seeing God answering prayer in pockets across this country and across the globe, really.
Tell me what happened on this objection to the National Day of Prayer. What happened recently?
Well, last year, there was one judge who decided that the National Day of Prayer was unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional, even though we've had it going on since 1775.
Right, over 900 proclamations for prayer. Every year, the president, 34 or 44 presidents have declared national days of prayer, and one judge says this is a separation of church and state issue, which it's clearly not. It's not an establishment of a religion in any way. And so we had an intentional group of people praying over this, and we were asking people, okay, how long is it going to take for us to make a stand and say Our monuments are coming down. In God we trust is being sandblasted off of standing stones in our culture. They're trying to take under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance. So how much more is it going to take for us to be loud and say, no more, enough is enough? And thousands came out of the war. We had like 300,000 people come forward and say, we're praying over this. And the judges in the Seventh Circuit Court overturned the decision 3-0 and said, no, we're going to keep this National Day of Prayer. This decision was incorrect.
You know, that's so encouraging to hear, because if we would just, I think some Christians have the idea that Jesus was so meek and mild and turned his cheek every chance he had with a lamb across his shoulders, that he wasn't a man of strength. And today's Christian men often lack the kind of conviction and strength that we need to recapture and say, enough with unrighteousness, enough with this stuff. And if we would show up and pray, just like 2 Chronicles said, if we will humble ourselves and pray, and if we will turn from our wicked ways, that God would heal our land. And if we get a manly Christianity back with pastors who will stand up for their convictions and pray, we can overturn all kinds of things and see righteousness blossom in our culture.
That's right. That's right. You know, it's you hit it right on the head, because you know, Christ, he comes back as the conqueror, and he comes back as the decision maker, and he establishes justice. And I think far too often we do that. We put Christ in this little box of the meek and the lamb. And indeed, he was the lamb, but he's also God, the
he's
whole
also
God.
the Lion of the tribe of
Revelation,
Judah.
yeah, oh yeah. You go before the throne of the Almighty. You're going into the presence of holiness and strength and integrity, and we need that manly Christian.
And see, what I love about the National Day of Prayer is that when I'm on my knees praying at an event like this, on that day of the National Day of Prayer, I feel like it connects me to men and women of God through the ages, yes, right? Through centuries of people who have trusted God for their families, for their churches, for their nation.
Yeah, you know,
and we're joining together and reaching through the centuries with them.
Really are. Well, you know, there's no age to our prayers. It says that he brings the prayers of the saints before the throne of the Almighty, and it's a sweet aroma to his nostrils. And so when we pray, it breaks down space-time barriers. It's a blessing to the Almighty Father. And so, of course, the enemy doesn't want you praying. Of course, he wants you busy and caught up in the stuff of the day,
right,
when the most important thing we can do is be on our knees before the holy and almighty God.
John, tell me, what is prayer? I mean, some people would say that prayer is trying to convince a reluctant God to do what they want him to do. Sort of, God, will you please get on my agenda? Others would say, no, it's us getting in line with God's agenda. Some say it's prayer is the muscle that moves the arm of God. What is the nature of prayer? How does it work?
That is a deep question, and really it is relationship with the Almighty. It is bringing our agenda in alignment with his. What is his will in these situations? The only time we can understand that is through relationship with him. It's like Enoch had relationship with God. I mean, he walked with God. Elijah had relationship with God. That's because they could understand the deep things of his nature, and that's revealed to us in prayer. You know, far too often we treat God like a genie. We've got these 3 good prayers. Give me a good parking lot spot today, or, you know, I really need help with this today. I've got a presentation. I got to nail it. As opposed to walking with the Lord, tarrying with the Lord, because sometimes he may not answer our prayers in our lifetime. It's about our obedience and intercession on behalf of others, on behalf of our nation, like Moses did for Israel, willing to lay down his life and say, if not them, then blot me out of the book you have written. That's powerful intercession, and it's something that happens daily, and God reveals himself to us in the prayer closet. And we don't give him a chance to do that.
That's right. You know, this is kind of the way I've thought of prayer. And you tell me if I'm on track here. I know that God's never out of tune with what's right. His judgments are righteous and true all the time, but mine are not. And so I think of prayer as me sort of tuning my heart to the note of God's will, right? It's kind of like on my guitar. It's off tune, and so that when I'm in tune with the heart and the will of God, I'm then in a place where my life can play the song and the music.
That's right.
Of the glory of God, of the gospel. And so I see prayer as God aligning me with his will and it's then that I'm ready to be used by him for his purposes on earth.
Well, absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Life is probably a perfect model of that. I mean, look what God has done in your life, bringing you along to where you are today, and how you serve God, and through the medium of television and everywhere else, you've done an incredible job, and God has used you in that way, and that's what he does. He brings us in alignment with his will.
We have just one more minute together this evening. I know that you have been on your knees in fervent prayer for some personal issues in your family's life. Can you talk to us about prayer in desperate times?
I think that's the reality, is that we've got to learn how to pray through the tough stuff. It's that tearing with the Lord, as I mentioned, that am I willing to pray for things that I may not even see come to pass? And my wife right now, we have the privilege of having 5 beautiful children. And because of them, I'm on my knees a lot, especially with one learning to drive right now. But my wife is battling cancer. She has been battling cancer since 1997. And so it's, how do you pray through that? I mean, is God hearing your prayers? People with unemployment right now, they're battling illnesses, all sorts of things. And it's that issue of, I'm praying and I'm not seeing that mountain move. Does that mean God's not hearing me? Does that mean I'm not praying strong enough? Because all those critics like Job had come out of the woodwork for you.
So how do you process that? My wife still has cancer. I want it to go away. So what must God be doing?
Yeah, well, and I know our prayer walk has changed, because it used to be, Father, just heal my wife. And it was sort of that selfish prayer. Now, I believe God will heal her, but he also helped us to understand that I have 5 children. So help us pass a legacy of faith. And if that means that she stays alive with me to do that, then to him be the glory. But however we accomplish his goal, that's the most important objective. And that's what we learn in the prayer closet.
As difficult as it is, we have to understand that there are the things we want, but there is a bigger train that is moving through time and history, and it is the glory of God, and that's the train that we want to be on. And to be servants is to say, Lord, use me for your purposes. Use me to accomplish your will on this earth, whatever it is. And the moment that I'm out of here, I am with you, and I need to trust you every step of the way.
Amen.
Thank you for blessing us and encouraging us with that.
My pleasure.
Please welcome Mandisa as she sings her song, Stronger.